So, hello there. I hope you can see me well and hear me well. Hello and welcome to today's talent track with Maximilian Seeger and his award-winning project, Jewels of the Sea. If you join us on Zoom, please mute your mics and camera. And if you're on LinkedIn Live, please post your questions to the chat. We will bring them into the session. My name is Arko Rudolph. I'm director of the UX Design Awards and head of strategy at the International Design Center Berlin, in short IDZ. We're the awards organizer. Just very briefly, we are a leading independent design institution with more than 50 years of expertise working here in Berlin, in Germany. Our mission is to promote good design as a driver of innovation in business and society. We founded the UX Design Awards in 2015 to promote the positive impact of people-centered design on our daily lives and to recognize the people and the UX talent that work on great projects worldwide. And actually, if you're working on great design, the call for entries for the next awards is still open and will be until the 2nd of December. So please jump to our website and check it out if you're interested to take part. But now welcome to our virtual award event series. We're featuring designers and teams that were distinguished in the awards and have them present the work and share knowledge with our professional community. You can join us twice a month for deep dives with professionals and talent tracks with up-and-coming designers. To stay tuned, you can just follow us on LinkedIn or social media or subscribe to our newsletter. But now let me introduce today's New Talent Award winner, Jewels of the Sea. It's an interactive installation where you can discover diatoms that are microscopic photosynthetic organisms. They are little known to most of us, but they are a key source of oxygen in our world. So they're quite important. And the jury highlighted the interaction and experience that takes place in this installation on several levels. It's about enlarging the microscopic elements, making them understandable for laymen and scientists alike, and images that are processed in real time and a fascinating and tangible 3D experience. That all summed up, combined, led to the jury giving a New Talent Award in 2022 to this project. So I'd love to introduce the designer who's here with us today, Maximilian Seeger. He's still a student at the University of Applied Arts in Würzburg in Germany. He's an interdisciplinary artist and designer with a background in media communication and communication design. His work includes interactive installations, multimedia experiences, and generative artworks that have been exhibited, for instance, at the Ars Electronica Festival in Austria, at Bass Festival in Istanbul, or Forking Room Festival in Korea and Seoul, among others. So, a warm welcome to you, Max. The screen is yours.
Thank you. So, at first, can you see my screen? That would be nice if you can give me a short feedback if you can see my screen.
Works well. Perfect.
Works well. Perfect. So, thanks for having me. As mentioned before, I want to talk to you about diatoms today, but I really want to start with how I got to the topic at all. And it all really started with this illustration I found in an old book from 1904. And the book is called Art Forms in Nature by Ernst Haeckel. And it showed these drawings of microscopic algae, diatoms in fact. And at first I couldn't really believe what I was seeing, because before I also was really interested in biologic growth, and older projects of mine also covered the topic, but I haven't really seen these perfect circles or perfect symmetry anywhere else in natural patterns before. So at first I didn't really believe that these drawings were really accurate. But then I started Googling diatoms and getting more into it. And this is Ernst Haeckel, by the way. He was an really amazing biology professor in Jena, who made a lot of first discoveries on microscopic algae, and but he also drew them. So this is another painting from him. And when I saw his drawings of the diatoms, I asked myself the questions I mentioned before. And when I Googled microscopic photos of diatoms, I was really amazed because they really looked this way. And so I started to get more on the topic because I wanted to know more why these organisms look this way, and also what are they doing, how their biology works. And what I found on the way was also that a lot of artists were interested in diatoms before. For example, in the Victorian age, about more than 100 years ago, there were a lot of artists who laid images on microscopic slides using diatoms. In fact, they really used pig hair to place them on microscopic slides. So what you're seeing here is a microscopic slide on the top. And if you really look closely, there are microscopic dots on the slide. And these are diatoms that have been placed by an artist in 1890. In fact, this was really a kind of hobby for upper class people back then, that they sat together and looked at these kind of microscopic slides back then. And I was really amazed that this complete tradition, or also this the knowledge about this kind of art craftsmanship, was barely lost. But back to the biology of diatoms, even if you can't see diatoms with your own eyes because they're between 200 and 500 micrometers small, that's, for example, the biggest diatoms are nearly as thin as your hair. You can see them from space, actually, because if they bloom together with other microscopic algae, except for example, in this NASA photo, you can spot the green patterns, the refraction of the light in the sea. And the other thing that has been mentioned before is their photosynthetic capabilities. And diatoms, in fact, produce about 25% of the world's oxygen, which is an amazing number, I think, because this microscopic organisms really produce the air we breathe daily. And also back in the days, but a bit more modern, there were some architects who were really interested in diatoms, because diatoms are built out of silica, and even if their structure is really massive for tiny creatures, they're really lightweight, which makes them particularly interesting for architects. So, for example, Richard Buckminster Fuller was really interested in diatoms and other microscopic algae, and investigated them. But also the architect Frei Otto, in fact, he had his own research group, which published 3 books on the lightweight anatomy of diatoms, which also has really influenced him on his works as an architect. But after all this research, what really stuck with me was, where is this symmetry coming from in the diatoms, and why is this nowhere else in nature? And the next question I asked, because this question is hard to answer, the next question I asked myself was, is this something you can algorithmically recreate? Is there math behind it that we can break down to replicate them digitally. So when I looked into that, I stumbled across a paper from about 12 or 15 years ago by a mathematician who's called Johann Gielis. And he invented a formula, which is called the super formula, which is actually not that complicated, but it applies for a lot of forms that occur in nature. And in his old paper, he stated that he thinks that the formula could be used to simulate diatom forms. So what I did in the process was at first turning this 2D thing into a 3D form by extending it in the third dimension. And when I did this and really tinkered around with it, I also already found that some forms of diatoms could be matched with this formula. But one thing that is really typical for diatoms is the surface structure on the top of these organisms. So I also did some research and found some conclusions also by Otto, but also by other scientists who have already tried to recreate certain kind of diatom surface structures with algorithms. And among these approaches, I stick with two different approaches. And first is one is the circle packing approach, which is really inspired by Otto, who simulates the closest packing of circles in a certain area. The other one is the Vogel distribution on the other side, and this is inspired by the Fibonacci numbers. And after that, I tried to combine these two algorithmic approaches in real time. So the 3D super formula, which applies for the overall form, together with the surface structure on top. And when I mixed these two together with some other algorithmic approaches to apply for certain biologic symptoms or biologic things diatoms have, like this speaker you can see here, the little knobs that point outwards. I really began to have an algorithm at my hands that could recreate a wide variety of diatom species just with one algorithm, really. Yeah. And after I had form, I also applied the materiality and the shading to the real-time algorithm. And there's a certain reason for this materiality, because diatoms are also called living opals or jewels of the sea, like the project is called, because they have a really strong refractive and iridescent powers, because they're basically made out of glass or opal, which is both silica based. So I really tried to, as close as I could in real time, match the materiality you could imagine that these microscopic organisms have. And also what you can see in this video, which was really the final way the digital diatoms looked, is that you could, it's just one algorithm with 50 parameters. So you could in real time loop between these species. And what I also did was, for example, with this real-time diatom, simulate how diatoms form colonies, because some of the species, they're not singular organisms floating through the sea, but they stick together in colonies. Like, for example, this kind of species sticks together in a long chain. And if we look at some of the digital diatoms that were created by this algorithm, you can really see that one algorithm is basically able to capture this whole variety of diatom forms. And if you, for example, compare the digital diatoms on my left side with the circular forms of real diatoms in a microscopic photo, you can see that it quite closely matches the real diatom species if you look at them under the microscope. Yeah, and here are some more different diatom species that were digitally created. And on the way, at some point, I really needed some help by a biological expert, because if you go back, for example, to this photo, you really see that there's a lot of detail going on that divides the different species. And that's something that to discover this kind of detail and link it to a certain species under a microscope needs years of experience. So I had the pleasure to work together with Matthias Burber, who is a really experienced microscopist, but also a taxonomist for certain microscopic algae. So for example, he worked for Max Planck Institute to identify different species. And it was really thanks to him that I had somebody who helped me have the right input to tweak my algorithm to really apply for this minor details as far as I could in certain diatom species. For example, this is a close-up of, on the one side, a digitally created diatom by my algorithm, and on the other side, a really close scanned electron microscopy photo from an Arachnodiscus diatom. Or, for example, here's a Aulacodiscus species, also a comparison between a microscopic image and a digital diatom. And after I had all this done, I started to turn the whole thing into an installation that could be experienced live. And because of the diatoms could be created in real time, I really wanted to link them with the experience of using a microscope and discovering real diatoms. So in the process, I had to learn how to use a microscope, which was really how to learn photographing if you hadn't had a camera in your hands for never actually. But after some time I managed. So this is some diatom microscopic footage that I filmed myself with a microscope. After some work, for the installation, I made a DIY Raspberry Pi camera that matched the used microscope I had bought for the installation. And the camera could look through the microscope and the lenses were matched. So I had a digital live footage of the microscope. And what I did with the live footage was training a neural network on different species of diatoms together with the images I acquired with my microscope. And this worked quite well after some training time. So in the final installation, what I did was the user could really use the microscope on a microscopy table, move around the slides, and then the live footage would be scanning with the neural network for diatoms that were in the camera view. And when a diatom was identified, the algorithm tried to produce a digital diatom that matches the real diatom that was detected, and then create a 3D digitally created replica that by hand tracking you could really move around, turn around and look at it. So there was a disconnection between the real-time live imagery from the microscope and the digitally created diatoms in real time. This was basically it. If you want to see like a whole project video, you can always go to my website. I want to close with some stories that happened like after the project was revealed, because there came some feedback from unexpected places where I didn't really expect anyone to approach me. For example, Johann Gillies, who invented the super formula, approached me some weeks after the project was released, and there was really some projects that came from this approach by him, because he was really interested in how to apply his super formula to 3D diatom, generated diatoms, which was really interesting for me. And also some research groups approached me, because there are a lot of research groups working on diatoms, because they're physically some of the most complex organisms to look at under a microscope. And so, for example, the Prakash, someone from the Prakash lab at Stanford University approached me, because they're testing microscopes there, and they just need a huge variety of 3D models of real diatoms, and they really struggled with 3D modeling all of them. So they wanted a generative approach to generate a lot of different diatoms in short amount of time, which was exactly what the algorithm I wrote did. So in fact, I was really amazed that what started out as some kind of design project really had some applications in science, even if that weren't the applications I could have thought about of at all. That as some kind of side story at the end. And if you want to get in touch, this is my email. If you want to have a closer look on the project, this is also maxseeger.de is also my website. So thank you for your attention. And if you have questions, just ask me.
Thank you very much, Max, for this presentation. Maybe you can stop your screen sharing. I hope that the internet will become better. The connection was pretty uneven during the presentation. I apologize very much about this. This really happens quite often in Germany. We don't have the stable internet over here. So thanks so much. And actually, if you missed anything, there is a movie about the presentation on our website and much more materials, of course, on Max Seeger's website. So Max, thank you very much for these insights. I'm wondering, so now that the connection is a bit better, this was a one-off installation, I understand, right? Done in your studies, but what was the trigger for it? Why did you tackle this topic in the first place?
So yeah, the first place was really this way of stumbling across this old book by Ernst Haeckel, which I showed, and it's really started off there because it was kind of like a rabbit hole, discovering this tiny organism I never heard about, and then discovering how important it is for our world's carbon cycle, the oxygen production, but also the silica cycle, which is also really important. And then discovering the beauty of the organism really wanted me to not only recreate it digitally, but also show it to others and tell the story of these tiny creatures.
Right. So what was your goal of the installation? Can you tell us a little bit about this? Was it just a showcase of the diatoms and a playfulness, or did you have a very specific goal in this project?
Yeah, I think when working with digital tools, I often ask myself, what are the things, for example, with the digital tools we have today, what can we show? And I think one really important thing that we can keep in mind is that we don't have to recreate something with digital tools that is already there, touchable, visible for us in real life. So I'm really interested in pointing the finger to things that we can't experience in real life, for example, the microcosm. So this was, I think, really great motivation to do this project, to make the microcosm tangible in a way, in a playful way, but also telling a profound story about really important microscopic being.
So it's fascinating, and above all, it's also an awareness project, of course, because you show us elements that we barely know that they're existing, and how important they are, and in a very, very beautiful way. I wanted to a little bit delve into the 3D generation and shaping and interaction techniques that you use. So maybe you can tell our audience a little bit about which kind of technology that you apply in, let's say, the artificial intelligence, the machine learning that you used, and the generation of the shapes.
Yeah, I think maybe the generation of the shapes is technically more interesting. So for this installation, I work with a software called VVVV. Maybe some of you know it. It's a Berlin-based software company, and for the generation of the shapes, these are all calculated on the graphics card, which makes them run really fast in real time, which wouldn't be a computer wouldn't really be able to calculate this on the CPU. So what you use for this is shaders. So all this happens in a shader for everybody who's into coding. And these are also, in computer graphics, you often think of triangles making up 3D shapes. And in case of these diatoms, they're not made out of triangles. They're just mathematic calculated volumes by a technique called signed distance fields. And at the end, if you can really easily make equations with these signed distance fields, you can add to them, you can subtract them, or do any kind of mathematical equation. And at the end, you don't end up with a shape made out of triangles, but just the volume, which you can render on a 3D screen with a technique called ray marching, which is basically a ray from your eyes shooting through every pixel of the screen. Really, that's a really breakdown explanation, but yeah, so this is basically how these were made. And about the AI part, this is, I would say, it was rather low-key. It's an image recognition network that's widely used. And I just retrained it with a lot of microscopic photos. What maybe is interesting, during the process, I started out with microscopic photos from the internet, but I really needed to use microscopic photos of diatoms with the exact lenses of the exact microscope and the exact camera I would be using to have the best, the best outcome and the best guesses by the image recognition network. So I ended up making my own training database with the microscope and just photographing a lot of diatoms with my microscope.
So that's fascinating. So it's both the 3D generation program and machine learning elements that you all did by yourself. So it goes to prove that such a project is even possible within the constraints or the possibilities of a university project. How long did it take for you?
So it was my bachelor graduation project, and it took the course of a whole semester, basically. Yes.
Okay, right. Um, which role did UX design and user research actually play in this project? I mean, did you start off, let's say, on a classical user research path and also use user research during the development, or was it more like a self initiated project and done with a focus on what you wanted to achieve in terms of the installation?
Yeah, I would say mostly because of the restraint of limited time for this kind of project. A lot of time went into the general research, but also the programming work beforehand. So the first, especially the interaction part and the installation was something that had to be done quite rapidly. So there was like no major user testing, which would of course have been really good to do. But mostly, I would mostly have to apply my own experiences from working with a microscope as a nobody, and how I would like to extend the skills of a microscope by, for example, hand tracking. Then yeah, then a wide testing of different users.
And you said that you were able to collaborate with the scientists, or maybe also several scientists. So which feedback, which insights were you able to get from them for the project that pushed the project further? And what was important probably for you, for them?
Yeah, I think for this project, it was really implicable. So I couldn't really have done it this way without any help by a biologist. It's if you start out with diatoms, you really can't recognize the different species. Some of them are really too similar. So if you want to remodel them, you would have to know which species you want to remodel and what are their certain criteria or certain specialities. So I really needed that help, and also the kind of ping pong work to create something digitally and then get feedback on it if it really matches the biology it should. Yeah, so this was really important, and also a lot of advice on microscopy was really necessary for me.
And looking back on this experience, do you feel that your design work has brought a benefit to the scientific field? And if so, which? Okay.
I was actually quite surprised that I got that much feedback by scientists, and most of the time it really pointed towards something that I wouldn't have thought of. For example, like generating 3D models, like I said, just in a really short time for testing, for different testing purposes. For example, for testing AI networks that recognize 3D shapes in microscopes, which some scientists are working on, or for just like growth simulations of diatoms. So this was really cool to see for me that even if you can't really perfectly match the real diatom, it's always an abstraction, some kind of digital abstraction going on there. It somehow had the necessary degree of detail that it was interesting to some scientists.
So looking back from this experience on this project, working together with scientists, what do you feel could be, I mean, big benefits that the design could bring to a science field, such as the one you've been cooperating with?
I think I'm a big fan of interdisciplinary work. I think it's quite good if two people with completely different focuses look at the same thing and then start to express what they think about it. And mostly both parties have a completely different view, but if they voice their view, they often trigger a new thought on the other side, which is really interesting, I think, and in some parts also necessary. And I also feel that there's so much interesting visual capacity going on in science, and sometimes scientists also themselves don't have the capacity, or it's basically also not their job to go the full way in exploring the visual possibilities behind their work. But it's a really interesting starting point for us as designers or artists to really go into this gap and try to help with visualizing certain things.
And looking back at your project by itself, are there any design or interaction elements that you're especially proud about? Can you share?
Yeah, I would say I'm mostly the recreation of diatoms in real time really is like the heart of the project for me, because it was like also something I struggled a lot with to get it done right. And I would say this is still something after, I don't know, 1.5 years where I would say it worked out quite well, and I'm still happy with it.
Right, and you said that the technology that you used for generating and generation interaction was pretty simple or straightforward, but actually I was wondering, what is actually the role of the interaction, of the shaping of the diatom forms by hand in this installation? Is there a specific role in this moment that the user has interacting with the installation?
So the user basically is really has the course of the whole installation in his or her own hands. So you could, from the beginning, decide what you want to lay under the microscope. So you could pipette from water samples from different rivers or lakes, or take some prepared samples under the microscope, and you could really move the slides. You could manually move the microscope slide around. And so you had, like, as the user, you had, this was like the one part. And as soon as you, for example, found a diatom, which was automatically recognized, and then the digital diatom was created, the user could interact via hand tracking, grab the diatom and look at it from all angles. So the 3D form really made sense, because the user could turn the diatom around and have a closer look. So I think there's two sides, like the beginning of the installation where you could really interact with the microscope in a more common way by just using it, and then the augmented part of the microscope where you could just basically grab into the microcosm and move something around.
And is there an educational level in the installation as well? Because of course, I mean, looking at the shapes, the diatoms from different angles is already an experience. But you also mentioned there is the colonies and the joining of the microorganisms, because I guess it can be a fascinating tool in the educational sphere as well.
Yeah, it has, so hasn't been applied for any educational use yet. It was just exhibited once actually, but I got some feedback also from diatom experts that they found it interesting for educational use, because what they do in their education is also looking at diatoms for a really long time and under the microscope, and this kind of playfulness, looking at it on a big screen and also seeing the 3D representations of the diatoms really seem to appeal to them. So I think, of course, for using it for a real educational purpose, it would have needed some more, it would have needed some extension to it. But it's, one could think of it, of course.
Yeah, I think that leads to an obvious question. What is this a direction that you're thinking about in continuing this work, or is it maybe other fields where you think of future applications? Do you have any concrete plans on this, or maybe even thinking about the business model to bring this into growth, into the market?
So I haven't really thought about a business model for this, but so the project accompanies me for quite some time now, and I would be glad to exhibit it again at some point. And I also start some collaborations, smaller collaborations with because of the approach of some scientists or also other designers because of the project, but there's no major endeavor going on with the project. But I, of course, would like to exhibit it again at some point.
So looking also a little bit further, a step further, I don't know, do you think that cooperations with companies could be interesting in terms of this project, or would you say it remains more in a, let's say, artistic realm?
I would say the installation as it is now in whole is probably rather an artistic installation or a design installation with certain educational aspects. But I think after the feedback I got, I think certain aspects of the project can be fleshed out or are interesting also to for scientific purposes, but also for business purposes, maybe, because I think the border is blurry there. So I think especially like generative design producing a huge variety of forms in an instant is just something that will get more and more interesting in the future, I think, also from the feedback I got. And in the case of diatoms, it's apparently also quite useful. Yeah, so some parts I think are interesting, but the whole installation isn't probably a good business case.
I guess it was made on purpose for the case of showing the research and the work that is behind it and making it work. Of course, the experience that you gained will be extremely valuable in other fields and other endeavors, which I'm wondering, even stepping back a step further and looking ahead, is there other developments, something that excites you a lot in your work, maybe around interaction UX design at the moment? Which are they?
So I think generally, as I mentioned before, I'm quite interested in interdisciplinary projects, whatever they are, and also in going this gap where you could, for example, dock yourself to some scientific development and see what you as a designer could do for that. And I'm also really keen on exploring the means of using modern technologies such as VR or AR for useful purposes, not only, for example, as I mentioned, recreating like a second world as we know it, but maybe using these tools for something that we can't really touch or see or hear in the real world, because this is what really makes it interesting for me, using digital tools to expand what we can do anyway.
Right. I think it's a brilliant finishing line. Thank you very much for your insights and for sharing your work with us. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. And of course, we wish you a lot of the best of luck for your next project, and hoping that the award will help you to grow.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Well, thanks to everyone for joining us here today. And if you missed anything, the recording will be up on LinkedIn right away, and on YouTube and on our website in 1 or 2 days. And please do join us for our next event, which will be on December 14th, when we welcome the designers from Kasicon Group in Thailand and their product award winning project Make by KBank, which is an exciting banking solution that humanizes personal finance. So looking forward to that. Please stay up to date on LinkedIn or social media, or just by our website and newsletter. Please check out our website for more information and for upcoming events, and of course for the upcoming call. And until then, stay well, have a lovely day, evening or morning, wherever you are in the world. Thanks a lot for watching, and stay well, and see you very soon again. Bye-bye.
Bye.